This is part 2 of Guess Right. In part 1, we talked about Guess Right before the events of the novels, and then went through Guess Right mentioned in A Game of Thrones, A Clash of Kings, and little more than halfway through A Storm of Swords, where the Red Wedding happens and Robb Stark, Catelyn, and other Stark loyalists are killed despite having guessed right. I ended last video saying we were going to talk about the ramifications of this event, how to end Guess Right, and then in another part talk about the Manderleys in Guess Right, Roose Bolton in Guess Right in our own world, etc. For this video, let's focus on Guess Right and the rest of A Storm of Swords, and all of A Feast for Crows and A Dance with Dragons. So the Red Wedding happens, and there is a huge response to this breaking of Guess Right. We see this not only throughout the rest of A Storm of Swords, but also in A Feast for Crows and A Dance with Dragons. The breaking of Guess Right at the Twins will, without a doubt, still be important in The Winds of Winter, whenever we get that book. For the rest of A Storm of Swords, we hear others respond to the Red Wedding. When Davos hears of the betrayal, he thinks, "A guest beneath his roof." These Freys are cursed. When Tywin and Tyrion talk of the Red Wedding in A Storm of Swords, Tyrion asks, "So Lord Walder Frey slew him under his own roof? At his own table?" And then states, "So much for Guess Right." Tywin responds, "The blood is on Walder Frey's hands, not mine." To add a cherry on top of all this Guess Right information, the last tidbit we get about Guess Right in A Storm of Swords is Bran recounting the story of the Rat Cook, a cook of the Night's Watch who killed the son of a visiting Andal king and served the king his own son baked into a pie while they were both protected under Guess Right. The Rat Cook did this because the Andal king had somehow wronged him. The Rat Cook was then punished by being turned into a monstrous rat that ate its own young, not for killing the king's son or for feeding him to the king, for a man has a right to vengeance, but for killing a guest beneath his roof, and that the gods cannot forgive. This could be taken as George reiterating what we already know. Guess Right is extremely important in Westerosi culture, especially the North. Or it could also be a way of letting us know the Freys will have what's coming to them. However, people that have gotten this far into the series are very aware that in the A Song of Ice and Fire books, like real life, not everyone gets their just desserts. Next we go to A Feast for Crows, where the first mention of Guess Right is when the Lords Declarant are coming to discuss what to do with Robert Arryn following Lysa Arryn's death and their blockade. Sansa, under the disguise of Elaine, think that once they, the Lords Declarant, eat our bread and salt, they are guests and cannot harm us. She thinks that the Freys have broken all the laws of hospitality when they murdered her lady mother and her brother at the Twins, but she could not believe that a lord as noble as Jon Royce would ever stoop to do the same. However, later in the meeting with the lords, in a disagreement about whether they should take Robert Arryn or he should remain with Littlefinger, Lyn Corbray takes out his long sword. But before a fight can break out, Lord Royce yells, "Put up your steel, sir! Are you a Corbray or a Frey? We are guests here." Another lord tells Corbray he shames them all with his behavior. We know Corbray is in the service of Littlefinger, but I like the bigger takeaway here. The actions of the Freys at the Red Wedding have earned them infamy. It is now an insult to be called a Frey, not that they were really popular to begin with. It's also helping push that Guess Right is important in the South and not following it is dishonorable. Because for the most part, before this, Guess Right was mostly talked up in the North. Now we begin to get hints of the disapproval from the southern regions. Next, during the Siege of River Run, Jenna Lannister is talking to Jaime Lannister. Jenna asks how the siege will be ended. Jaime responds, "Treat with the Blackfish." She counters, "That won't work." Jaime adds, "I mean to offer him good terms." She replies, "Terms require trust. The Freys murdered guests beneath their roof. And you? Well, I mean no offense, my love, but you did kill a certain king you had sworn to protect." Here we see trust is broken down, and words are being treated as wind. Later during negotiations where a Frey is present, Lord Piper talks of not yielding to such as these, making a rude gesture to Edwin Frey and Walder Rivers. The Frey responds, "If my Lord Piper means to imply," to which Lord Piper interrupts, "I don't imply, Frey. I say what I mean straight out, like an honest man. But what would you know of the ways of honest men? You are a treacherous lying weasel, like all your kin. I'd sooner drink a pint of piss than take the word of any Frey." The Frey's reputation has definitely taken a dive since their breaking of Guess Right. Lastly, in A Feast for Crows, Brienne of Tarth is shocked when she is given over to the Brotherhood without banners. Brienne gasps, "Bread and salt. The inn. Septim Maribald fed the children. We broke bread with your sister." The woman that brings her to the companions, Jane Heddle, says, Guess right don't mean so much as it used to, not since Milady came back from the wedding. Then later, when Brienne is presented to the undead Catelyn Stark, Lady Stoneheart, she says that she's dead. Jane Heddle responds, "Death and guess right. They don't mean so much as they used to. Neither one." These simple statements keep driving home how devastating the phrase act was to society and structure. It also shows us how it impacts the common people. If a lord doesn't have to keep guess right, why did the baseborn? Finally, let's go to the last book, A Dance with Dragons, where guess right is brought up a lot, and we see just how pissed the North is about the Frey's betrayal and the Bolton's hand in it. This is the only book I won't be listing guess right mentions by chronological order. Instead, I'll clump them by character or region. It's not as neat and tidy, but it makes a little bit more sense. The first mention of guess right is actually in Essos, where Tyrion Lannister in the company of Illyrio is worried about being poisoned and reminds him, in the Seven Kingdoms it is considered a grave breach of hospitality to poison your guest at supper, to which Illyrio assures him, here as well, yet when a guest plainly wishes to end his own life, why, his host must oblige him, no? I love that this informs us not only is guess right important in Essos, or some parts, but adds a little twist. What would happen if a host helped a guest hurt themselves, if they wished it? It was most likely more tongue-in-cheek on his part, but that does bring up an interesting idea. What if your guest wanted you to harm them or kill them while under guess right? Surely the gods wouldn't curse you for harming your guest if they asked it, right? Also in Essos, when Xaro visits Daenerys Targaryen trying to get her to sail away, he finally tells her he should have slain her while she was back in his city. She responds, "I was a guest beneath your roof, and ate your meat and mead." Even Daenerys, not raised in Westeros, understands guess right. This could be a combination of her brother and others teaching her the ways of Westeros, but also further showing that in Essos, guess right is observed, in some places. Next, I was asked last video about guess right and Dorne, and in A Dance with Dragons, we actually do have a mention of guess right in that area. When Oberyn Sand wants to kill Sir Balon, Prince Dorne responds, "Sir Balon is a guest beneath my roof. He has eaten of my bread and salt. I will not do him harm. No." So there's your answer. From north to south, guess right is important. Moving on to Davos Seaworth, he has two encounters where guess right is important. First, Davos ends up on the shores of Sweet Sister and is eventually brought before Lord Godric Borrell. Instead of turning Davos over, he feeds him and updates him on current events. Davos gladly eats the food and wine offered, thinking any stale crust would have tasted just fine. It meant he was a guest here, for this one night at least. In his thoughts he adds, "The lords of the Three Sisters have a black reputation, but even robber lords and wreckers were bound by the ancient laws of hospitality. I will see the dawn, at least. I have eaten of his bread and salt." Here we learn even the lowest of lords, robber lords, and wreckers are bound by hospitality. It's also interesting Davos believes guess right will be upheld, even with the recent upheaval going on with the Red Wedding. Later, Davos is with Lord Manderley and his Frey guests. The Freys are trying very hard to convince others they were innocent in the whole Red Wedding. Oh no, they didn't break guess right. It was Robb Stark and his other warg Northerners. They tell the story that Robb Stark changed into a beast before their eyes and tore out the throat of their cousin Jingle Bell, a harmless simpleton. Beast Robb would have slain their father as well, but Sir Wendell, Manderley's son, put himself in the way. They later go on to explain that the Northmen also turned into beasts and attacked the Freys. The Red Wedding was all their doing. The mark of the beast was on them all. Lord Manderley plays along with this, seeming to believe the lie. Yet we know that even the Freys don't expect the North to believe their lies, but think they must pretend to believe or die. Davos, however, outright says, "You're a liar." And a bit later, Davos asks a Frey what a Frey would know of honor. Obviously, Davos takes their breaking of guess right very seriously, something we see mirrored in other characters. Later, in a room without the Freys, Manderley reveals his true colors and his hatred for the Freys, among other individuals. Cough, Roose. Manderley angrily recounts, "My son came to the twins a guest. He ate Lord Walder's bread and salt and hung his sword upon the wall to eat with friends, and they murdered him. Murdered. And may the Freys choke upon their fables." Never think that means I've forgotten. The North remembers, Lord Davos. The North remembers. And the Mummers farce is almost done. Lord Manderley goes on talking about how the Freys came to White Harbor by sea. They had no horses with them, so he shall present them with a horse as a gift. He asks Davos if they still give gifts in the south. Davos replies, "Some do, my lord, on the day their guests depart." Lord Manderley replies, "Perhaps you understand then." This dialogue gives us another juicy bit about guest right. You can end it by giving your guest a gift. This becomes very important when the Frey pie theory is discussed, which will be a video on its own when we discuss the Manderleys. Still on giving guests gift to end guest right, much later in A Dance with Dragons, when Host and Frey ask Lord Manderley where his kin are, he responds, "The road has many dangers, sir. I gave your brothers guest gifts when we took our leave of White Harbor. We swore we would meet again at the wedding. Many and more bore witness to our parting." Lord Manderley seems very intent on letting people know that he gave the Freys a guest gift, ending guest right. Next, let's go to the Siege of Raven Tree, one of the last Stark Loyalist strongholds in the south, where Lord Tytos Blackwood is holding off House Bracken. Jaime Lannister arrives and meets with Tytos. Tytos Blackwood tells Jaime, "Lucas was murdered at the Red Wedding. Walder Frey's fourth wife was a Blackwood, but kinship counts for no more than guest right at the Twins." This bit is important when we talk of consequences of breaking guest right in this type of society. Lastly, let's go to the Wall and talk about each time guest right is brought up there. First, Marsh, a man of the Night's Watch, informs Jon Snow that there is talk that Jon Snow is becoming too friendly with Lord Stannis. Jon asks what they want him to do, take up swords against Stannis and the Wildlings? Stannis is a guest, and the laws of hospitality protect him. Along with the other debts they owe him, Jon is refusing to break guest right, even to comfort his own men. Later still at the Wall, when there is a dislike of the Giant 1-1 being there, Jon Snow informs Sir Patrick of King's Mountain that, "I do not know how you observe guest right at your mountain, sir. In the north we hold it sacred. 1-1 is a guest here." Sir Patrick, smiling, jests that if the others turn up, does he plan on offering them hospitality as well? While I don't think this barb was a way of saying they don't consider guest right unimportant where Sir Patrick is from, it is fascinating to think if guest right has a limit. If the others ask for guest right, would they honor it? Do you honor guest right for other species? Jon Snow definitely does for the race of giants. Would Jon Snow do so for the others? Not really ever going to be important, but the mind can wonder. Finally, at the Wall, when Cregan Karstark and his men come after Lady Alice, Jon Snow meets them on the King's Road half a league south of Mole's Town, before they could reach Castle Black and claim guest right or parley. Later, after taken, Cregan Stark reminds him, "Snow, you have no right to hold me. The laws of hospitality." Jon counters, "You are no guest of mine. You came to the Wall without my leave, armed to carry off your niece against her will. Lady Alice was given bread and salt. She is a guest. You are a prisoner." I love that guest right is so important that Jon Snow will ride out to meet someone he doesn't wish to give guest right to. Okay, that is guest right before the books and throughout the books. We learned that to end guest right, you must present your guests with a gift. We also learned that the breaking a guest right at the Twins has consequences that are far-reaching, and the Frey's popularity has plummeted. Next video, I know, more guest right, we'll talk about these far-reaching consequences of breaking guest right. We'll also have a video about Roose Bolton and guest right, the Manderleys and guest right, and guest right in our own world. But I am starting more months on Sunday. I'm trying to get out these extra videos on other days, but my work seems to be getting in the way of my hobbies, damn work. And there are other non-Game of Thrones videos I need to work on. So I will start more months on Sunday for realsies, but we'll still have our guest right videos and maybe another Bolton video sprinkled in there.